Welcome to another Ellen MacArthur Cancer Trust how-to video. My name's Oliver, and today we're going to be going through how to do the daily checks on a marine diesel engine. It's really important that we check the engine every day because it's a vital bit of safety equipment, and unlike a car, we can't just pull over onto the side of the road when it goes wrong. Every engine is slightly different on every boat, but if you speak to your skipper, they'll be able to help you. But basically speaking, all checks will follow I wobbled you. It's a nice little anagram to remember what we're checking. I stands for isolate. It's really important on some boats where you start the engine is different from where the engine actually is in the boat. And if you're working on the engine and someone tries to start it, that's very dangerous. So it's really important that you isolate the engine so that it can't be started. This might involve turning the power off so that there's no power to the engine and taking the key with you while you're working on the engine. The engine is now isolated. It's got no power, so it can't be started. W stands for water. There's two waters that we need to check on the engine. There's the raw water, which is the salt water, and there's the coolant, which is the fresh water with additives, which circulates internally within the engine. The first water that we're going to check is called coolant, and it's the fresh water with additives, or coolant, that goes around the engine. So on this boat we've got an expansion tank, so we're just going to open this up. Well, you can only do this while the engine is cold. We're just going to check the level. You can see on the side it's between the min and the max mark, and if I look inside I can see the level, and I can also see that it's green. And there's no oil or residues floating around inside of it, so we know that the coolant level is correct. Some engines don't have an expansion tank system. They have on the top of the heat exchanger a little cap which you'll need to open and do the same visual check as I just did on this expansion tank. Again, your skipper will be able to help you with that. It's important with the coolant side that we don't check it unless the engine is cold. The second part of water is the seawater. Okay, we need to make sure that seawater is able to get to the engine. You'll notice here that I'm checking that the sea cock is open. Now on most modern boats, the sea strainer, which is effectively a filter, has a clear top so that you can inspect to make sure no debris is blocking the system. In this case, it's not see-through, so I'm going to have to check it. In order to do that, I'm going to close the sea cock, and then I'm going to open the sea strainer. There might be a little bit of water spill out, but that's okay. The sea cock is shut, so we're not going to allow lots of water in. Okay, you can see very clearly that there's no debris in the sea strainer. It's nice and clear. Okay, so the water should be able to flow in easily. So I'm going to put the top back down. I'm going to close the sea strainer back up, nice and tight, hand tight, and I'm going to open the sea cock. I'm now going to check and make sure there's no leaks, which there aren't, and I know that the saltwater system is good to go. O is for oil. There's actually two oils we want to check, the main engine oil and the gearbox oil. Now the gearbox oil isn't actually a daily check, but I thought I'd mention it. It's usually checked once a month or once a week depending on the use of the vessel, but the oil, the main engine oil, is something we do want to check on our daily checks. Okay, so to check the main engine oil, we're going to identify the dipstick, which is usually brightly colored. Okay, we're going to have a bit of rag ready. I'm going to pull the dipstick out, and without spilling any, we're going to clean the dipstick. And then we're going to put the dipstick all the way back in, pull it out one more time, and then we're going to look at the level. And you can see here that this is perfectly topped up. Okay, so it's just at the top mark. We can also see that this oil isn't actually that black, and that's because it's had an engine change recently. So if it's really dark, which it can be, it might be telling you that it's been a while since the engine has been serviced. Ideally, the oil level wants to be between the top mark and the bottom mark. If it's getting towards the bottom mark, we want to top it up, and it shouldn't be above the top mark. B is for belts. We need to check the condition and the tightness of the belts. Here we have the belt. On different engines there'll be different belts, and the belts might do different things, but generally they'll always power an alternator. Here the belt is getting driven from this main pulley here. It's driving a water pump and it's driving the alternator. On modern engines, the water pumps are usually driven by gears because that's more reliable. If this belt fails, the cooling system will fail. So we need to check this belt. To do that, we're going to make sure it can turn just about, with not too much force, 90 degrees. We're going to check the deflection isn't more than 1/4 of an inch, about that. And we're going to check the condition for cracks. Now there's no cracks here, and there's not also a lot of dust which can come off of these belts if there's a misalignment and covering the area. You can see that there isn't a huge amount of dust on this belt, so I think we're happy that the condition of this belt is good. Potentially with that movement, I'd say it's maybe just on the slack side, and we could do to tighten it up a little. If we over tighten the belt, however, we're going to wear out the bearings on the alternator and the pump, so we don't want the belt to be too tight. So as I say, you're looking for about 1/4 inch of play. The next B is for bilges. With the bilges, we're just checking that there's no, we want to keep them as tidy as possible, that there's no leaks in the bilge. If there is water and oil or diesel in the bilges, then it's very hard to know if that's new or old oil. So by keeping our bilges nice and tidy, we can see if something is leaking, and that's a prelude to a problem. So we're always looking to keep our bilges tidy. We've got a oil catch mat here, which helps with the environment. We can catch any oil, and you can see that it's clean and there's no leaks or liquids on that, so that's good. Leading on from bilges, we have L for leaks, and these two are linked. If we did have something in the bilges, we have to assume that it's come from somewhere and there might be a leak. Our bilges are currently dry and clean, which is good, but we still need to just have a visual inspection, because a leak won't start necessarily catastrophically. It could start as a small weep, and there's usually evidence of that. So on the saltwater side, this is the impeller. We're looking around it, and you can see there's no salt crystals, which indicates that there isn't any weeping and there's no leak going on here. If there was a small weep, because it's a hot engine and a hot engine room, the water would evaporate, leaving salt crystals. So anywhere on the saltwater side, you're looking for salt crystals. On the freshwater side, the coolant leaves a powdery residue. So again here, where the coolant is coming into this freshwater side of the engine, there's no powder, there's no white residue, and because of that, we can be confident that there's no leaks. It's very rare that you get fuel leaks on a diesel engine, because if there's air in the fuel, the engine won't run properly. But we do again want to check all the connections, and again we can see that there's no leaks here, there's no drips, the filter's dry, and everywhere on the fuel system, including the pre-filters, we're just checking to make sure that there's no leaks. E stands for electrics. The engine needs electricity to start. Now, as part of our isolating, we've actually disconnected the batteries from the engine, so it can't be started on us. But we need to be aware that if there's no electrical power, we won't be able to start the engine. So your batteries need to have sufficient charge. Another check that we do with electrics is we just check all the connectors. We need to make sure that the systems that keep the engine running are not loose. That's all it is a visual check. If you saw a wire hanging off, there's probably a problem there, and it might lead to an issue with the engine. So again, that would be something to highlight to your skipper. But basically speaking, if every wire has a place and there's no loose wires, everything's connected, then that's what we're checking for. D stands for diesel. We can see here that the boat currently has a full tank of fuel. Now, these gauges can be notoriously unreliable, so it's a good idea to keep a log of how many engine hours you've run, which we have here, and also how much fuel you think you're using, so off the gauge, but also when you top up with fuel, making sure that that's indicated accurately on the gauge, and keeping an approximate amount of fuel in the logbook that you have left to burn. Generally speaking, the modern yachts have a large range, and it might be that you don't fuel up during the week, but we always need to just keep an eye and make sure we have enough fuel for the intended journey. U stands for unisolate. We've previously made it so that the engine can't be started, but we want to now make it so that it's good to go. So whatever we did at the beginning to isolate the engine, taking the key away, etc., we're now going to put all the engine back together, the compartment. We're going to make sure that it's ready to start. In the event of an emergency where we need the engine, we want it to start, so we need to make sure that we leave it ready to go. So we've checked the engine and we know it's good to start. Upon actually starting the engine, there's a couple of last things that we're going to check. So I'm now going to start this engine. The start sequence is different from boat to boat, and again, you should speak to your skipper. I'm going to turn on the power. Make sure that there's some revs on here, but the engine's in neutral. I'm going to press the start button. As soon as it starts, we're going to check for water coming out of the exhaust. So we know that we've got cooling water. The next thing that we are going to check is that the engine goes back to idle and it continues to run. Before you leave the dock and under the supervision of your skipper, it's always a good idea as well just to check that the engine goes into gear and into reverse. Okay, and that means that everything has been tested and everything is good to go. I hope you found this video useful, and I look forward to seeing you out on the water soon.